Greetings to all lovers of mysticism and secrets. Moscow is a vast metropolis, inhabited by millions of ordinary people. But what city do they really live in? What hidden history does this city truly hold, and what is concealed beneath it from our eyes? Let's delve into it. Moscow is a well-known city that stands out among others due to its scientific and technological progress, as well as its industrialization. It is currently home to 10% of Russia's population.
However, despite these achievements, the city is quite young.
For example, the Great Black Sea city of Kerch is almost 3 times older than Moscow. And by the way, Kerch also keeps a huge history, which is literally covered with earth just like Panticapaeum. Today we will explore some curious moments in the history of Moscow. To begin with, we will examine that very page of history which is presented to us so demonstratively. And at the end of the video, we will successfully flip that page to discover the facts that are usually not publicized. We will learn what lies beneath Moscow and why they are so diligently trying to keep it hidden from us. Subscribe to not miss out on this information. And now, let's return to the history of Moscow, as it has managed to acquire a rather interesting and controversial history in such a short span of time. In just 1,450 years of its official existence, Moscow has experienced over 100 fires. Any other city under such circumstances would have long disappeared and been forgotten by future generations. However, Moscow, on the contrary, has continuously rebuilt itself, becoming even better, larger, and more powerful. It's quite curious why Napoleon chose Moscow instead of the former capital, St. Petersburg. As we are taught in school, Moscow was founded on swamplands just 8 centuries ago. Speaking of the marshland and the soil on which Moscow stands so successfully. But is it really successful? Even today, we can observe bricked-up windows, and sometimes even entire floors filled with clay and sand. As we are told, such a cultural layer has formed. And without the cultured people of the past, right? They, as we are told, didn't even bother to take care of the streets, which resulted in the formation of a multi-meter layer of dirt and garbage. This topic is well known to many. I believe you also have something to say about it. Indeed, it is interesting that not only Moscow, built on marshland, is covered by layers of soil. Many cities have accumulated what is known as the cultural layer. During excavations, archaeologists often discover quite unusual artifacts, and sometimes even entire buildings. For instance, in 1838, the construction of the well-known Grand Kremlin Palace began. During the excavation for its foundation, workers stumbled upon an underground church with numerous secret passages and corridors. But what and when could have caused an entire church to be buried underground? This question, however, did not concern the workers much, and after the discovery, they simply covered it back up. For example, can you imagine there is an entire buried temple building that, instead of being excavated and restored, was simply covered with gravel, and a new building was constructed on top of it? It's hard to believe, but this is the reality of our life. It is not hidden, but it is not publicized either. We all know about the Tsarist underground tunnels that crisscross the center of Moscow. They tell us that these were built solely to safeguard the treasury and ensure the safety of the top officials. However, during that time, St. Petersburg was the capital for a long period, and most of these tunnels were located there. But did the Tsarist tunnels remain unused during this time? It's strange, isn't it? And now, no one would argue that the Moscow Kremlin is a unique place. It's like the heart of Moscow. The Kremlin walls hold many memories, but there are no fewer secrets hidden beneath its walls. Under Moscow, there are entire underground streets and alleys that sometimes merge into extensive tunnels. There are people who know this not just by hearsay but from their own experience. These individuals are known as diggers, who are very familiar with the underground Moscow. However, urban exploration, known as diggering, is officially prohibited, not only in Russia but also worldwide. It is forbidden to dig up and explore what lies beneath the ground. Whatever was hidden from our eyes should remain unknown. In completely different sources, there are various pieces of information about the existence of an entire underground city hidden beneath Moscow for several centuries, concealed deep within the Earth's layers. But, could it be that it's not as deep as they say? Let's take a look. The Church of St. Barbara is located on Varvarka Street, and it is interesting that it was built literally on top of an old structure. Directly underneath it is a completely different building, also a full-fledged church, and entirely of white stone. However, for some reason it ended up underground. Historians claim that it was a common building practice in the past to erect fully functional churches underground. Really? Additionally, they even provide us with the exact dating and the person responsible for this. This underground church was built in the 15th century by the Italian architect Aristotele Fioravanti. Yes, once again, the Italians were involved in constructing the entire Moscow, even its underground parts. But what kind of folly is this? Why build a church underground? And a couple of centuries later, in the 18th century, to construct a new building on top of all this. In the 15th century, constructing an entire underground temple, especially from white stone, might seem quite remarkable considering the challenges they faced with surface construction at that time. It is possible that the temple was originally built above ground and stood confidently before being submerged underground. However, the reason for it ending up in an inexhaustible pit of soil remains unclear. What if there are many more similar buried buildings that are either still unknown or simply not talked about? Considering that beneath Moscow, in the 19th century, there was a huge network of underground passages and entire chambers, it is possible that some of them might still exist there. Unless, of course, they have grown in size over time. Indeed, beneath Moscow, besides this temple, there are vast architectural structures that include stone galleries, extensive halls, underground corridors, secret chambers, and bricked-up doors leading to real repositories of the past. And all of this is deep, deep underground. It's not a secret that old buildings in Moscow have deep basements that are simply not accessible to the public. I think many of you have heard about the Neglinka River, which runs deep into Moscow. Literally, this river flows underground through pipes. But few people know that only a sewer hatch and a few meters of soil separate people from this underground river. For example, let's consider a few street names that are associated with the names of rivers flowing beneath them. Lenivka, from the Russian word laziness. It is the shortest street in Moscow. And beneath it, the lazy Lenivka River flows through a pipe. The Presnya River is located right under Krasnaya Presnya Street. There's also Kodinka, Kodinka Field, and Filka, Filinsky District. If there is an underground flow, it means that the soil beneath the ground should be washed away, thereby increasing the load on building foundations. And that's exactly how it is. The Moscow Kremlin has been suffering from subsidence since the 18th century. Just 20 years ago, Moscow was mostly built with 5- and 12-story buildings. And it's not without reason that they were constructed. They didn't exert such strong pressure on the soil as the current buildings do. Nowadays, various structures are often erected on artificial grounds. The oldest example is the Cathedral of Vasily the Blessed, built on an artificial hill that was piled up over the moat of the fortress. Another well-known structure also slowly tilting to one side is the Mausoleum. It was also built on artificial ground directly over a moat. The destruction of buildings in Moscow is not a new issue. For instance, the Russian State Library is experiencing deterioration. As some claim, it was caused by explosive works conducted 20 years ago. However, what's interesting is that cracks were already appearing in its structures back in 1933 when the library was under construction. There are numerous underground passages, wells, and unclear corridors beneath the library. The Borovitskaya metro station is now situated directly beneath the library, suggesting that tunnels and passages existed even before the metro's construction. After the discovery, it became known that they had found secret passages belonging to the buildings of Ivan the Terrible's Oprichnina Palace. Archaeologists uncovered steps made of white stone that extended deep into the Borovitsky Hill. Afterward, all excavations were prohibited, and the passages were safely filled with concrete. Such is the unknown underground Moscow. However, of course, there are some things we do know for sure. In Moscow, danger may await you anywhere, even where you least expect it. Not too long ago, there was a loud headline: a whole sea discovered beneath Moscow. Few people know that the Moscow River, as it flows through Moscow, loses up to 30% of its total volume. But where does this water disappear to? Like all streams and rivers, the water simply flows into the underground Sea of Moscow, which, by official estimates, is equivalent in size to the Caspian and Black Seas combined. But how did an entire sea end up beneath Moscow? Even more intriguingly, how was it discovered? They say that academician Gubkin found the sea. He was simply searching for oil beneath Moscow and allegedly stumbled upon the whole sea with salty water by accident. However, this raises numerous questions. How was it even allowed to search for oil beneath the capital, knowing that it is covered with secret passages everywhere? Moreover, this was not a simple excavation, as such activities were strictly prohibited throughout the city. It is indeed quite strange that they decided to search for oil specifically beneath Moscow, despite being aware of the overall oil exploration landscape. While there are still vast oil reserves in places like Yamal, they suddenly chose to transport all the equipment to Moscow and start drilling deep underground. And this was happening in the 1930s, precisely when the construction of the metro began. It is all quite peculiar, isn't it? Curiously, during the geodetic works carried out before the metro construction, nothing unusual was discovered. But could it be that these works were not conducted at all? After all, only 300 meters separate the Belaruskaya and Novoslobodskaya metro stations from the underground waters. Merely 300 meters of soil, a very thin layer beneath which the water lies. And everyone is well aware of this water. For example, the mineral water Moskovskaya was extracted directly from wells in the so-called underground Sea of Moscow. So, what does this mean? The mystery of Moscow is not only hidden in its external history but also in its unknown underground. Concealing the underground of Moscow is indeed a challenging task. New facts keep emerging here and there, fascinating the minds of new and aspiring researchers. I believe this has been quite interesting. I would be glad if you support me in this video and share it with your friends. It will allow most people to realize the reality of what's happening. Subscribe to not miss anything. See you in the next videos.